Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. I don't think I've connected with you since the spring semester has started, and I'm really happy that you could join us here today. We have an exciting conversation set up with Ms. María Fernanda Espinosa, the former president of the UN General Assembly, and Juli Blasco, the special assistant to the Global Women Leaders, who will be leading us in a conversation really about that. They'll do a brief presentation on the GWL initiative, on the Generation Equality Forum, and then a lot of our time will be spent hearing from you and having a conversation with you about what is needed to move the needle forward with regards to gender equality and achieving that in this generation. So with that, I will turn it over to María Fernanda Espinosa with a warm welcome from all of us here at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and on behalf of all of the students here as well. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to partner with you on this, and a really exciting opportunity for students to contribute their voices directly to the agenda for gender equality as it goes forward. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for this introduction. And I'm extremely excited to see you all, to have this exchange and conversation. Believe me that in my professional career, which I value the most and where I learn the most is through these exchanges in, with people that are committed, to craft a better world, to basically, I know that you're there. I know that you are committed to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, that your studies and your professional energy is going towards making our world a better place. And so I'm extremely excited. I'm going to share with you today a very brief a PowerPoint presentation, but I will just go very quickly. Juli Blasco is going to help us, and very quickly, because basically as quickly as I can, because I want to listen from you. And I think that's what brings us together. And thank you again, Jessica, for this opportunity. So Juli, if you don't mind, we can start sharing these. Okay, superb. So basically, we are the group of women leaders for change and inclusion. We are, first, of course, Jessica introduced me at the beginning, but I am María Fernanda Espinosa. I am from Ecuador. I have been the Minister of Foreign Affairs of my country twice, the Minister of Defense, Minister of Cultural Natural Heritage of Ecuador. I was the first ever ambassador appointed to the UN in Geneva and New York, the first female in 75 years of history of the UN. Can you imagine? And I was also elected president of the United Nations General Assembly. And I put emphasis on that because here again, in 76 years of history of the United Nations, there has been only 4 female presidents in 76 years. And what is surprising is that the 4 women presidents have come from the Global South. The first was Madame Lakshmi Pandit from India. The second one was Madame Brooks, a lawyer anti-apartheid from Liberia. The third one came from Bahrain. And the fourth one, it's me, the first woman from Latin America. So it means that we are not doing enough. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we are here today. And of course, now I am a proud member of the Group of Women Leaders for Change and Inclusion. I will explain what the group is about a little later. And currently, I am part of the steering committee of the Gender Equality Forum, which is the Beijing Plus 25 process. Let's go to the next. So basically, our group of women leaders is composed of 54 women who we gathered to join our voices to call attention, international attention, on the need to reach gender equality and the empowerment of women. And we see the multilateral architecture, international cooperation and solidarity, international law as a vehicle of critical importance to support the women's rights agenda. Basically, the objective of our group is to strengthen the multilateral system, and in order to ensure that multilateralism with the United Nations at the center delivers on gender equality and women's rights. We know that changes that have been made so far are due to the pressure made by society, by change makers, by young women like you. And here we are raising our voice to make pressure on issues of most relevance. And believe me that these 54 women, I call them the 54 influencers, because among our group, we have persons like Melan Verver, but also former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former prime ministers from New Zealand like Helen Clark, former heads of state and government, high-level officials from the UN, Susana Malcorra, which, as you know, was the chef de cabinet of former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, etc., etc. So it is a group of 54 women with influence, with advocacy capacity to multiply our message. And I feel, very privileged and honored to be part of the group. Basically, we work on 7 areas of work through working groups, on domestic violence, of course, on vulnerable people, especially on humanitarian needs. We have a working group on multilateralism and the capacity of the multilateral system to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to the post-COVID-19 recovery. A group working on climate change, on food security, on women, peace and security, and on women economic empowerment. And why is that we are doing that? Why is that sometimes, we hear, these women again, these feminists again. What is, so important about women's rights? And believe me that every number, every statistic has women, in a bad situation. If we recall that less than 2/3 of women are in the labor force, and nearly 400 million live in extreme poverty. We still have a global gender pay gap, same capacity, same jobs, and 35% less salary, 740 million women working in the informal economy. And if we look at the participation of women in politics, and here I really hope that some of you are going to take the path of politics. We need more women in power. We need more women heads of state and government. Can you imagine that there are only 20 female heads of state and government among 193 countries? And this is really a very low, considering that we are 50% of the world's population. And in cabinets, 21%. I think that I was so pleasantly surprised to see the cabinet composition of the current US administration, which if I'm not mistaken is 45% or something. But you know, the average is 21% of ministers, female ministers in cabinets. And in many countries, women are not represented at all. Let's go to the next, Julie. And you know, this is one of the first paradoxes. We have very few women presidents, heads of state and government. And when you make the list of the countries that have been more successful in addressing and tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, you see that most of them are women. You know, the bright example is New Zealand with a female prime minister. A bright example is Germany with Angela Merkel in charge. In my region in Latin America, we often use the example of the Caribbean countries, especially Barbados, with Mia Mottley as the prime minister. So it is not a coincidence. We have proved that we are capable, we have the talent and the potential to make things happen, including facing and addressing the pandemic. So, and unfortunately also this same pandemic, you know, is putting women's in higher risk because of different reasons. One of them is that 73% of healthcare workers are female, which means that they are more exposed to contagion and they are more exposed, you know, to excessive workloads, etc., etc. And the other critical issue is the incredible increase of domestic violence because of lockdowns and because of the weakening of the response capacity, especially in the developing countries. In my own country, in Ecuador, because of the fiscal stress, the first thing they did is to decrease the number of shelters for women that are abused and that are victims of domestic violence. So basically the world, the global information we have is that calls to helplines by women have increased in 35% because of the pandemic. And in our countries, in the global south, basically the installed capacity to respond to that is weaker. So this is an issue of critical concern. You know, every 2 hours, one woman is killed due to gender-based violence and sexual violence, especially by the use of small arms. So, you know, and I can go on and on. You know, data of unemployment, data in violence, data, for example, in the particular situation of women, refugees and migrants, you know, human trafficking. You know, can you imagine that, you know, 72, I think it's 72, 73, but we can double check that, of persons that are trafficked are women and girls. So all this means, and if we can go to the next, Juli, all this means that every effort, you know, every transformative idea, every paper you write, you know, every civic engagement that you have has to be geared towards resolving this arithmetic, what I call the arithmetic of inequality. And just to look a little bit at the history 25 years ago, you know, one peak moment in the women's rights movement was the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. It was, you know, a landmark reference document that came out of the fourth World Conference on Women in '95. And I worked at the time as an advisor to indigenous women. I helped indigenous women of the Ecuadorian Amazon to prepare to be present in Beijing. And I wrote an article with this experience called tracing the Beijing conference from below. And at that time, I'm sure I had a little bit, I was a little older than you are, but I was very, very young. So after 2 weeks of intense political debate, the 189 governments agreed to commitments that were unprecedented in scope. Let's go to the next, Juli. Basically, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action covers 12 critical areas of concern, and that has been a little bit of the scaffold of the International Women's Agenda. Issues on poverty, on quality education and capacity building, health, violence, armed conflict, economic empowerment of women, of course, women in power and decision making, human rights, the environment, and the girl child. It's a very comprehensive declaration and program of action. Now, 25 years later, after Beijing, what has happened? I would say that, unfortunately, we have had a huge implementation gap. When you look at action efforts, the Sustainable Development Goals, we see that unfortunately, there has been some setbacks in the women's rights agenda. You have experienced that in the US in the past 4 years as well. So I don't need to explain, but at the UN, when I was in charge of leading the works of this Parliament of Humanity, which is the General Assembly, believe me that we were reopening and renegotiating documents to remove the reference to the word gender. And perhaps we can discuss that, but I experienced a little bit of a setback on the women's rights agenda. 25 years later, after the landmark Beijing Declaration and Beijing Conference, I think that basically what we are experiencing now is a global effort to ensure that commitment to action, to transformative action takes place, that leaders commit. And here, when I say leadership and leaders, I'm not only talking about messianic leaders, about heads of state and government, but like shared leadership, which includes not only governments, but civil society, the private sector, trade union, artists, academia, social influencers, to put the focus on action and accountability for gender equality. So this Generation Equality Forum is giving already us the opportunity of a major global inflection point for gender equality. And we are focusing on action, on how is that we can and we have to transform society to make sure that we live in a world that is less unequal and less sexist and more women friendly, and where women, are entitled. Sorry, that noise is the wind. I am sitting here in Manao, in Nicaragua. It's very windy. So that is what the Generation Equality is about. Under the leadership of Mexico, of France, and the operation of UN Women, we are putting together, through 6 action coalitions and a special compact on women, peace and security, a set of transformative actions. And perhaps we can have an exchange on what do you think that, what is the list of priorities, and what are the transformative actions that you would suggest that are taken into consideration. The 6 action coalitions: gender-based violence, economic justice and rights, women economic empowerment, bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, feminist actions for climate justice, the relationship between women's rights and the climate crisis is very much interconnected, technology and innovation for gender equality, and feminist movements and leadership, which includes, women in power. And we are working in a new compact on women, peace and security, which is in the making as we speak. I forgot to say that the Generation Equality Forum, which is very important, is organized in a flux. It's a process that will start on the 29th of March. You are all invited to connect. We will make sure, Juli, that you have all the information through you, of course, to connect, to participate, to interact, from the 29th to the 31st of March in Mexico, organized by the government of Mexico. And then in June in Paris, in France, where there is going to be, the presence of heads of state and government committing to an action-oriented agenda for women. And the voices of young women are really taken into consideration. There is a core group, a leadership group of the forum where youth organizations are represented. They're part of the decision-making table, and the Generation Equality Forum basically it's organized through two main principles, which is transactionality, an holistic view of the women's rights agenda, but also an intergenerational perspective. Intergenerational perspective is what we are doing here, to ensure that there is intergenerational dialogue, there is agency, and there is leadership and voice from young women worldwide. So that's basically how the forum is organized, and we will be more than happy through our group of women leaders to share the information, perhaps through Jessica, and ensure that you're all connected, that you participate, and that you are part of this new moment in the international women's rights agenda. Now we can basically, the group, our group, we are women with sometimes 30, 40 years of experience working on different fields, but with a common denominator of gender equality and women's rights. Basically, our idea, our purpose, our motto is intergenerational dialogue. So we come to you to hear your voice, to listen to your ideas for action. If you were the pen holder of the transformative action on the 6 action coalitions, what would you write? What would you put in? Transform the legal system, cultural shift, etc., etc. So we want to reach, gender equality, and to do so by considering the voices of as many women as we can. And younger generations, we are convinced, I'm a witness of that, can push movements forward. So we need your help, your agency, your intelligence in making gender equality a strong, powerful, and substantial movement from which women and girls and society at large can benefit. And I think that this is my last slide, Juli, or we have something more? No, that's it. That's it. And please look at our website, follow our social media. Every day there is some news, interesting news to be shared. And now the floor is yours, Jessica. I don't know if you or Jess, you're going to help us moderate, but here when the interesting part comes, which is the conversation with you all.
Thank you so much for that overview of where we've been and how far we've come and how much further we still have to go. And I just think it's such an exciting opportunity for us to be able to hear from someone like you that has had such a long history of work and success in this field. So we're just really fortunate to be able to learn from you today and to join you in this conversation. I know that Maria and Juli are very interested to hear from all of our students. We have a mixture of graduate students in our certificate program for gender, peace, and security, and also undergraduate students and students that work with us at the Institute. So all of them have a strong background in gender and how it intersects with peace and security, and are very well placed to contribute to this conversation. I thought that your question to the group about if you were the pen holder, what would you be outlining as the key things that we should be considering across these 7 areas was a really wonderful question. So I think we could pose that first to the group. And if you could, you can raise your hand. Jess is monitoring the hand raising on Zoom, or if it's a pretty small group, so we can also call on you if you wave at us. But if you could just introduce yourself and kind of what piece of this puzzle on gender, peace, and security you're working on, and then what you would do if you were the pen holder. Elena, let's start with you.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and it's nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And I think that this is certainly an important forum. I think that what's been missing from my perspective is sort of the bringing together of women who've been working on these issues for so long, and those of us that are just entering this field. I'm a second year in the Master of Science in Foreign Service program here. I regionally focus on the Middle East and North Africa, but thematically focus on gender security and issues of violent extremism, specifically on sort of gendered components of preventing and countering violent extremism. And I think that sort of, if I were to sort of see what's missing and sort of what I'd like to see sort of move next, sort of 25 years after the Beijing platform, is sort of increasingly intersectionally informed conversations surrounding the WPS agenda, especially. I think that we're seeing the need for that in the United States and abroad. I think that sort of a lot of these sort of forums and especially sort of in the United Nations, sort of doors are open for only certain subsets of women. And I think there's certainly a need to keep that door open and invite conversations with women and sort of complicate our understanding of gender as well. I think that for a long time, my understanding is we've been sort of like counting women at the table. Sort of numbers of women in parliament are certainly good indicators, but I think are also at times insufficient to sort of see whether gendered and feminist agendas are actually being advanced. And so I think that that would be my 2 cents on sort of what I'm seeing is maybe needed next.
Jessica, you want us to collect some comments and then go back, or you think it's better to have a direct interaction every time that there is a comment? Or
I'm not sure. I think it's totally up to you what your preference would be and what's easiest for your process.
Well, because I think what Elena mentioned, she's so right. You know, her 2 areas of concern, I think that she is totally right. And of course, chapeau for the areas where you're working. They're very, very complex geographical areas. Believe me, I was in the Lake Chad area when I was at the UN, and believe me that violent extremism, the role of Boko Haram, you have no idea how much it is affecting, you know, the security and the dignity of women. And the connection between conflict and climate change, I think it is, you can see it in your face. Sometimes when you write academic papers, it makes sense, but when you sit on the ground and you see all these refugee women coming from Nigeria and all these West African countries affected by violent extremism, all the Lake Chad area, and why, you know, the connection between drought, food insecurity, and conflict, you know, comes together. Plus, well, anyhow, but that wasn't your question, but I was very excited to hear that you're looking at that. Basically, your comment was, number 1, inclusion mechanisms at the UN. you know, at the decision-making table. I think that's one of the deficits that the UN and the multilateral system has. You know, multilateralism, it's intergovernmental by nature. And one of the key challenges has been how to bring in the voices of civil society, different ages, different regions, different backgrounds, and to make sure that the system takes seriously these diverse voices. And the Secretary General always speak about inclusive, networked multilateralism, and it is common sense. It is the natural development of the system. The problem is, how do you build in a system that is not a case by case? When I was the president, believe me, I didn't organize any high-level event, any public panel without ensuring first of all, gender parity, regional representation, but also making sure that it was not only about optics, you know, but about bringing in these views and perspectives to the agenda. And I think that this is your second comment about numbers, about optics. You know, how many, oh, okay. And we, you know, feel so bad because 75% of parliamentarians worldwide are still men. And in some parliaments, there is no, you know, one single female represented. And we continue to repeat the numbers. And I agree with you. It is not only about numbers. It is about quality. It is about rights. It is about the quality of our democracies. And it's not that we bring us, you know, we bring perspective, we contribute, we bring quality. And believe me that I was very critical of the quota systems in my country. I said, no, I mean, we are entitled, we are more capable, means that naturally we're going to sit at the table, we are going to be elected, doesn't happen. So I changed my mind, and now I'm a strong supporter of the quota system, because otherwise it does not happen, unfortunately. So until society, our value system, our cultures, naturalize our right to be at the table as women from different ages, then we need to continue to have a quota system. But I am totally with you, Elena. It's not about numbers only. It is about quality.
Thank you so much.
Jennifer, would you like to weigh in? I know that climate was mentioned, so I do hope that you'll talk about climate since you have such a strong background in that. But Jennifer, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you. Yes, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Yeah, I really think it's wonderful that the initiative has, you know, targeted climate as one of the objectives. And I would say, your question was, what do we do if we had the pen? And that would be really leveraging the 9 months between now and the next UN climate conference in Glasgow in November, especially now that we have Secretary Kerry in the US. But similar to what you've said about seeing women coming up in the UN system, a lot of the gender and climate work has been in the global South and hasn't been taken up so much by, you know, the wealthier, more developed countries. And in the public conversations that I've seen about raising ambition, you know, ahead of Glasgow and committing to, you know, new targets, you know, new 2050 targets, the role of gender hasn't been elevated to that high level. There's a lot of great work working on the margins and in the working group level, but not at that high political stage. So, you know, that would be one thing that if I could had the pen, that's what I would work towards. And then also really leveraging this opportunity of COVID-19 and the economic stimulus packages, the Building Back Better that we hear in the US. Because I do believe that if we're targeting, you know, gender responsive financing or other gender sensitive budgeting, that is a really powerful tool. As you know, I'm sure you know all of this, to really leverage gains in other fields.
Well, I think that you have to be the pen holder at the Generation Equality Forum and make sure that what you have mentioned is fully taken into consideration. I think that, you know, I have followed. I'm really an old timer. You know, I was part of civil society, you know, very radical activist group in '92 in the first Rio conference, where when, you know, the big Rio conventions were adopted, including the climate change convention. And since I've been participating in climate negotiations for decades now. And what you are saying is so true. In the, you know, when we negotiated the Paris Agreement, it's a landmark. The truth is that you start to look, you know, the way you see the negotiating table. And I was the head of delegation in Paris for my country. You see, you know, very slim participation of female negotiators on climate change in general. And, you know, we at the time in Paris, let's take that example. We had Cristiana Figueres. She was the head of the secretariat of the convention. We had Laurence Toubiana, you know, a French diplomat. She was working hand in hand with Minister Fabius to make sure that we reached an agreement. But most of the negotiators were male. And when we had to you know, sleep in the conference center and spend hours and hours, it was very, very obvious that there was, you know, a lack of balance there. And that is, of course, a starting point. Then at the end of the day, what you have is, you know, less concern about the impact of climate change on women's lives and rights. There is a groundbreaking, as you know, Jennifer, a groundbreaking instrument, which is now, I don't have the name, but it's the principles, the guidelines for gender and climate that were adopted as part of the climate change negotiations. That is a very interesting framework. And now we have to give life and traction when countries report on their NDCs, national determined contributions. All the efforts on mitigation, on adaptation, on resilience building, in my opinion, have to report back on women's rights and women empowerment. And I don't think that we have reached that level. When you talk about climate finance, the you know, $100 billion per year for climate, the climate adaptation fund, then it is not clear, you know, how these gender sensitive budgets work. If you look at the multi-millionaire recovery packages from COVID, I think that there is a long way to go to ensure that there are markers to see where is the money going. You know, the billions and billions, especially in the industrialized world, I have to be honest, because poor countries, they are really struggling with fiscal deficits, with buying the vaccine, with making sure the economy continues a little bit to move. You know, I can only, you know, feel envious about the I think it's $1.2 trillion at the US, you know, this recovery plan, unimaginable for the global South. And looking at all these rescue packages, 0.3% is going to the global South. And according to one Bloomberg study, but I think things have changed, I think it's 0.25% is going to climate neutrality, let's call it. So there is a long way to go, especially in implementing, delivering, and applying the already made commitments and principles. And sorry about the long answer and the long reaction, Elena, but your points are, you know, ¿cómo se dice? Perfect, you know, for the agenda. And a gender sensitive climate and adaptation efforts is much needed. And carbon neutrality efforts, the zero net emission movement that is in full speed right now, has to consider the role of women as not only as victims of climate change, which we know they are, but also as agents, as negotiators, as decision makers.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I see some more hands up. Kila, I totally messed up your name, didn't I? Please tell us how to pronounce your name correctly, and then we'd be happy to yield the floor to you.
My name is Kyla. Hello.
Kyla, okay.
I am currently a graduate assistant working on diversity and inclusion in international affairs across APSIA schools. So firstly, I completely agree, and I'm so happy Elena brought it up, the intersection of these issues, whether it's gender and sexual orientation and gender and diversity. It's not enough to just have women at the table, because that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be advancing the rights of that group. So kind of the overlapping of different identities is crucial. But on to my next point, I am a graduate student in the German and European Studies department. And I have a concentration in migration diplomacy and asylum policy. So I deal a lot with the humanitarian sector. But to this point, how can regional organizations like the European Union and global North countries who have these huge economies and on paper have these initiatives to promote human rights and advancing the rights of women? So how can these individual entities better cooperate and assist with the agenda without taking it over, which is often a problem once they commit to something?
Well, Kyla, I think that first of all, I'm extremely happy to see that your work, turns around migration issues and the role of regional organizations. And I always repeat this phrase, which I fully agree with, is that the history of humanity is the history of war, religion, and migration. And it is true, that has been, you can draw the map of the history of humanity just looking at these three very important variables. And in terms of migration, it has become a very contentious political issue. Even though migration has existed forever, since the beginning of humanity, today, I don't need to tell you, but the rise in xenophobia and racism is happening as we speak. And the impact of migration in national and local economies also. And it's incredible, but when you really look at the numbers, you see that migration and migrants in particular are an incredible contribution to the economy of the country of origin, but also of the country of destination. In most cases, migrants are a source of wealth and cultural diversity. I don't need to tell you all of that, but I come from a country, Ecuador, where we have experienced, being a country of origin, a country of transit, and a country of destination. For a long time, Ecuador was the country #1 in a number of refugees of the Western Hemisphere. We have received hundreds of thousands of Colombians in Ecuador because of the civil war and the conflict in Colombia for a long time. And believe me that it is a challenge, but societies can deal with that. It is not extraordinary. When I was president of the UN, one of the achievements that I often allude to is the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration. And that was, that it did happen in a conference in Morocco. But at the same time, I have to tell you that it was not easy because unfortunately, we had so many countries not joining the compact, even though it is not a legally binding instrument, but and it created a lot of tension in the negotiations within the UN. It also fractured unity in the European Union. You mentioned that there are countries that were really opposed, clearly opposed to the compact, and other countries that were very much in favor. And there were tensions between these two positions within the UN and within the EU, sorry. And this continues to be, an extremely charged subject. For the first time, positions on migration are determinant for voters, for electing or not electing presidents. And I think that, how can I say this? And the best way to prevent migration, if it needs to be prevented, is to combat the biggest pandemic, which is bigger than the COVID-19, which is the pandemic of poverty and inequality. Because in my experience, and believe me, Kyla, that no one wants to leave, its home country, the family, the loved ones, just because you want an adventure. It doesn't happen. You leave your country because you don't feel safe, you feel you don't have opportunities, and you want to preserve your family, or you want to travel to another place in order to feed your family in your home country. So it's not, and I really hope that we reach a time and a moment where migration is going to happen because of the personal will of a human person. And what is interesting, for example, is that the Ecuadorian Constitution, and it happened when I was foreign minister and then advisor to the Constitutional Assembly in Ecuador. Our constitution recognizes the right to universal citizenship. And my country is a defender of universal citizenship. If you are a human, you are entitled to be a citizen of the world, and you're entitled to live wherever you choose to live. And I think that would be the human direction of migration.
Thank you so much. It's so enriching to hear from your wealth of experience on these issues, and also to be hearing from the students as well. Mariana, would you like to weigh in?
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Smith, and of course, Maria Fernanda, for this amazing experience of listening to your experience, but also having the chance to share our ideas. And I have two, if I had the pen, I have two ideas in particular. One with regard to the multilateralism goal, and the other one with regard to the women's participation goal. I have been working at NGOs, but also at international cooperation agencies. And with regard to the multilateralism, what I've observed is that we need to have a commitment from within the organizations on a transformative and intersectional gender equality effort within the organizations, not only from the organization to the program, like to the outside, working in the implementation of different programs for reducing femicide in Mexico, for supporting civil society. There are gender equality requirements that programs have that are implemented by multilateral organizations, but often the multilateral organizations themselves not necessarily predicate with the example. And I think I would write a commitment on intersectional and transformative gender equality efforts within the organizations. That's the first one. And the second one was in women participation. I'm also supporting a group, a feminist platform in Mexico. Its name is AUNA, and they are supporting women to run for public office. We are. And in that process, so the elections for midterm elections in Mexico are next summer. And what's happening now with our candidates, the women candidates that we're supporting, is that they are being victims of political violence, really, really complex. So I observe that this is a big barrier for women to be able to participate, that they are target of serious threats throughout their candidacy, and also when they get to office. That's the case in Mexico, and I can offer evidence in many ways of the women that we're supporting. So I would write a commitment to address that too, because the parties open positions for women, but that path is so complex, and there are no consequences after women are victims of those threats becoming a reality. There is a lack of proper judicial processes that answer to the needs of these women that have been victims of political violence. So there's a lot to do on the judicial piece of it, on the legislative piece of it, but it can start with a commitment to address that issue and acknowledge that that's a huge barrier for women. Those were my 2 suggestions, and thank you so much for giving us the chance to share.
Thank you, Mariana. I gather you're from Mexico?
Yes, I'm Mexican, yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, well said. I think you should all be sitting, at the table at the Generation Equality Forum and writing, the new women's rights agenda from, this intersectional and transformative perspective that you mentioned, Mariana. I cannot be, more in agreement with you. And the truth is that, the CSW, every year, deals with the issue of inclusion, of participation, of feminist movements, and the role of civil society. And as I mentioned at the beginning, what has happened is that it is the way the UN deals with participation of civil society in general, in my opinion, is a problem. It is a structural problem. It is a case by case. And depending on how far the NGO lobby can push, and it depends, for example, on how the president of the General Assembly is closer or friendlier to civil society, and how open member states are to listen to the voices of civil society. I think it has changed. I've been, in UN negotiations for 20 years or more. And I think that we are now living a moment of reinvention. And there is, a huge opportunity to make the voice of civil society heard. That the Secretary General has a mandate to produce a report on the future of the UN. I'm a little bit, connected because I launched the process of the UN 75 commemoration, not as a party, but as a moment of reflection and reinvention. Member states came up with a political declaration of 12 action points, which I highly recommend you look at, because it's going to mark the future of the UN, and in terms of the thematic priorities, but also in terms of the structural reforms of the organization. The role of society, of we the peoples, as the first article of the charter states, we the peoples created the UN. So we the peoples are entitled to have a voice. This is a moment because of the big shock of the COVID-19 pandemic, where I see openness, interest in thinking about this inclusive UN. During the UN 75 process, there was a world survey on how people thought about the UN and its future. And believe me that 80% of the people responding, 1.5 million people responded to the survey. 80% said, no doubt the UN has made the world a better place. But, and here's the but, it needs to be retooled. The multilateral system of today, of the 21st century, needs to rethink its working methods, its decision-making mechanisms. And it's not that you and I understand that intergovernmental processes and representation of states, it's the hardcore, let's say, structure. But how is that you have a built-in mechanism to ensure that we the peoples have a voice and a seat at the table, especially, well, and one of the key issues is this intersectional and transformative approach to women's rights and the gender equality agenda. And on your other recommendation on the on issues of political violence, I would say yes, 100%. And I have been personally a victim of political violence myself. I have to share with you also that when I was performing my role as president of the UN General Assembly, opposition parties of my country undertook, a political trial against me for situations that, every lawyer said, but it doesn't make sense, it's ridiculous. And they didn't have the votes. And basically what they wanted to do is to weaken my power as president of the UN, but more importantly, when there are enough votes in parliament for sancionar, how you say that in English, you lose your political rights for 2 years. So you cannot be a candidate for 2 years. So it's not that they wanted a trial for a position I didn't have anymore as foreign minister. I didn't have it anymore, but the trial was as if I was in office. It was just to make sure that they removed my political rights, because the opposition was afraid I was going to go back to Ecuador and be a candidate for something, which wasn't the case, but that's politics. And I need to write a book on this. And when I was Minister of Defense, especially at the beginning, all the press, the media, talking about having a woman Minister of Defense, it was an offense. And, during my first formal ceremonies, military ceremonies and things, they never mentioned my speech or what I said, but the way I was dressing and the color of my dress, etc., but not what I was saying. I know how it feels. I know why women are so scared about going into politics. And I think that we have to make sure that at the national level, but also at the international level, there are built-in legal mechanisms to fight impunity. You are so right, Mariana. I mean, they walk away, hurting your life, your personal life, your political career, and there are no mechanisms for accountability and to fight impunity. So believe me that I'm writing that down, and I'll make sure that what you are saying today, it's being heard and articulated. But of course, you can connect directly to the Generation Equality Forum in Mexico and address these very critical issues. And back to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I realize that we're about at time now. I don't know if how flexible people's schedules are, if we want to stay on for one last round of questions, or if we should wrap up. I defer to you, Maria Fernanda.
Well, I'm having the best time of my life. This is the high point of my week, where I sit in endless webinars and etc. etc. But I'm very happy to be here. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, I'm here with you and enjoying this very, very much. So it's up to you.
Great. Well, we can stay on here. Jess and I can stay on. If anyone else who hasn't contributed to the conversation would like to share. Margaret. Is it Meg?
Meg, yes,
Meg.
sorry.
Yeah.
My Zoom name changes frequently. Yes. Hello, and thank you again so much for taking the time to talk to us. I'll try to keep it relatively brief. I'm a first-year graduate student in the Global Human Development Program. And so a lot of what Mariana was just saying about having commitments from within an organization to promoting gender, but the mechanisms not following through. I see that so frequently in different development projects where gender is a box that you tick, but it's not something that's integrated into the project from the beginning. And endless, I think, source of frustration. But this isn't quite so much a question, just I wanted to acknowledge a lot of the work I've been doing has been with youth development and speaking with young people about, what they're envisioning for a better future for themselves. And one of the things I hear from young women especially is this sense of isolation from what might be considered a women's movement. And so I really appreciate even like this experience today, taking the time to hear voices from younger women, because especially what I hear from women even younger than me is this frustration with kind of an ability to address some of the shortcomings or failures in what they see in women's movements in the past. And so I think whether that's in terms of not being intersectional enough or inclusive enough or things of that nature. And so I really do appreciate the organizing conversations like this that are trying to make up for that and account for that. And that was just the comment that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Well, it seems like it's like a pre-recorded phrase, but you are so right, Margaret, and your concern about how development projects, initiatives, are using gender as a tick box and not really, making the role of women and the structural approach to equality in general, a mechanism that can be, that is where you have accountability, that you can report back on this particular issue. And when you say, I work with youth development, I really take very, very seriously, the future of young women, because I see, a paradox there. And the paradox is that the intelligence, the transformative power, the innovation that comes from young women worldwide, you name it, in climate negotiations, in issues of peace and security, in issues of humanitarian response, etc., etc. Now it's like, we used to speak on behalf of women and girls and talk about their needs, but they have taken the stage and the floor themselves. They're extremely articulated, they're heard, to listen to their voices is extremely important. And on the other hand, because I mentioned a paradox, how can we accept that 50% of the world is not connected to the internet? Más o menos. In Latin America, 51%. And when you look at the difference between boys and girls, the numbers, the gap is huge. when you look at the effects of the COVID pandemic, how many boys have left the schools? How many girls have left the schools? There's a huge gap. I was trying to find my numbers here and I cannot find them, but you can find them. It's so easy now. But it is, you start thinking, what is going on? And what is going on is that the care economy, the unpaid care work, is putting a lot of pressure in women in general, but in girls as well. So, I mean, all these arithmetics of inequality and these efforts should go beyond the tick box that you mentioned, Margaret. And I'm so happy that you're all committed to these issues from different backgrounds and perspectives, but, to ensure wherever you go, whatever you do, a paper, but also groundwork to make sure that accountability, reporting mechanisms, for example, for development aid, for development initiatives, especially in the global south, that we can report back how much is that we have contribute, to structural transformation of the inequalities, not only in income, not only in access to education, but inequalities in access to power as well. And here I'm not speaking about public office or going to parliament. I'm speaking power in terms of even in power in households, power in communities. And this is something that we need to continue working on. You said, be short, but you inspire me. And sorry about the long comments to your comments.
We appreciate the long comments. I know we're all learning so much. Elizabeth.
Hello there, and thank you so much for joining us today. Something you just said actually reminded me about another element that I was thinking about regarding this greater conversation, and it was talking about the household. Well, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a first year Master of Science in Foreign Service student, and I focus in international development, particularly in Latin America and the Middle East. And upon graduating, I'll be entering the US Foreign Service. My kind of observation or question to you is, you emphasize how our potential as women, we're 50% of the population and it needs to be amplified. But at the same time, there's another 50% of the population. And I find that in many spaces talking about gender equality, it does tend to be a very female dominated space because we are doing the work to raise our own voices and amplify, but that still does not deny the fact that there's still 50% of the global population that is male. And my question to you is how to kind of go about cultivating male allies in these initiatives and bring them more into these types of spaces, and how can that kind of be complementary to the work that we're doing? Because it's, at least the way I see it, I feel like it's inevitable. You do need these male allies. Like, you do need to use that to leverage and work and make our agenda work. So yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, I cannot agree more with you. And it is, it is a challenge because I am a strong believer that, to build, less sexist societies, more equal societies, a true generation of equality. It is a societal effort. It has to come, from every corner of society, and that includes the other 50%. I mean, that is so important. And there are, people that are working on boys' education, for example, and they see that, as the best investment to work with boys to ensure that when these boys grow up, they grow up with a different mindset, with a different value system. And I think it's so important. And sometimes it is difficult to sell that to some feminist movements. They said, we have been left aside for so long that it is our opportunity, it is our space, our voice, our narrative, which is also true. It is true, of course, but the issue of balance, I think it's, and of true equality, and of reaching out to the other 50%, it is critical. And I'm so, and I have to tell you that in my diplomatic career, I see that the United States has a built-in, gender equality gender equality policy in its foreign service, which is, very interesting. And let's hope that the UN, the US this time will join this wave of feminist foreign policies, that are appearing here and there. I think it's very interesting. Perhaps you would like to look at these feminist foreign policies in different countries and what they mean. And I really hope that, one day, not only we will not need to have quota systems, but to name our foreign policies feminist, but just foreign policy which has an embedded, culturally, institutionally, legally built-in, equality dispositivos or mechanisms. But for the time being, it's interesting. Canada has a feminist foreign policy. Mexico has a feminist foreign policy. When I was foreign minister, not the first time I was landing, but the second time, believe me, you never know how long you're going to be a minister. The first thing I did is an affirmative action gender equality policy for the diplomatic corps in Ecuador. Very quickly, I had the help and the support of UN Women. I gathered a group of female ambassadors in Ecuador. I put them to work, female ambassadors of the Ecuadorian Foreign Service, but also I invited female ambassadors of the diplomatic community accredited in Ecuador. And they brought a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge to the table. And now we have a policy. And here perhaps an anecdote. The first time in 2007, when I was appointed foreign minister, I said, how many female ambassadors we have? And basically, believe me, among 60 ambassadors, there were 2 female ambassadors. And when I asked why, they kept giving me, you cannot imagine the kind of explanations I received. Women, they don't like to travel that much because of their families, and if they decide to have a family, then they cannot travel, so they prefer not to. I said, bring me to the human resources department, bring me, a roster of the diplomatic career and the ratio women-men. And I realized that women weren't promoted, like half of the time, women were not promoted to the higher level, and for different reasons. And then I discovered that there was a regulation in our law, the Foreign Service law, saying that when a couple in the Foreign Service got married, one of the 2 had to resign. This is real life. And I said, why is that? Can you give me the statistics? How many men, how many women have resigned? And it so happened that in only one case, it was the male diplomat resigning because they got married. Why? Because they couldn't go, to a mission. They couldn't travel as couple. And I said, no. I mean, this cannot be. And during my tenure, I sent to a diplomatic mission to married couples for the first time. So I made all the changes. We went through Congress. It was a major transformation. And until this very day, I continue to receive, letters of thank you, photos of children saying, we are in mission in Geneva, thanks to you, thank you very much. We are in Paris, etc. as a couple. The only thing, perhaps to make things easy, is that you have to go to a place where, for example, there is a consulate separate than bilateral, or a bilateral embassy and a multilateral one. Let's say in New York, there was a married couple. One was working for the UN mission. The other one was working for the Consulate General, but as a couple. These are real life things that one can do, but believe me, foreign services in general are also, they have institutional structure that are discriminating against women and female diplomats. So this has to change. That's why we need more women in power, more women to be pen holders and change the regulations to ensure that we have, full access, we are entitled. And, I even went through the hassle to look at the qualifications of female diplomats and see, how many points they have. It's about exams and points for promotion. And I was in shock to see that most women had, higher marks than their husbands or husbands to be, and they were the ones resigning. Sorry about this personal story, but I think that there is a lot to do, and I'm very much looking forward, Elizabeth, to see you as part of the U.S. Foreign Service, and because it is very professional, because it is strong group of women and men working in foreign policy.
Thank you so much. I think it's been so interesting just to see how you've been able to push forward this agenda in the various different positions you've had. And I know that's really inspiring as we all go out into our various fields and the places that we'll occupy, even down to the papers that we'll write, as you mentioned, that there's always an opportunity to be pushing this forward in the work that we do and in the circles in which we find ourselves. And so I think, are there any final questions? We didn't hear anything from the undergraduate students, but if there's any final questions, we could take one more and then we can close. No final questions? Okay, well, thank you for such a rich conversation. I feel so proud of all of our students and how progressive they're thinking about these issues and how comprehensive your knowledge base is about what the important things are that we need to be paying attention to as we move forward gender equality in this generation and for the generations to come. I know this has been a really enriching conversation for me, and I'm sure it has been for Maria and Juli as well. I will turn it over to you all if you have any final questions or comments to the students, but on behalf of all of us here, thank you so much for this opportunity to engage in a conversation with you about this, to provide direct input into your notebook, which I know will travel to really important places. And we just really appreciate this wonderful opportunity for us to engage with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Smith, Jessica, for this opportunity. It is really so enriching. And I am not surprised, honestly, to see the wisdom, the perspective, the contributions that you make to making sure that the women's rights agenda really moves forward. And I would invite you to be connected and follow the Generation Equality Forum, to be connected to the Mexican Forum and to the Paris Forum. This year is going to be like the high point in the women's rights agenda. And thank you, for allowing me to listen and learn from all of you. And I'm available, in case you have any question and any need for a conversation. I'm fully committed to this intergenerational co-creation. And thank you again, Jessica, for this. Thank you all, for a wonderful, interesting, fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.